This is Rich Berliner. I'll be moderating our panel today, Fiber and Shared Infrastructure for Connected Commercial and Corporate Real Estate. I'd like to welcome everyone to the last panel of day 2 of the Connected Tech event, the Connected Virtual Tech event, I should say. And we've got a really great panel, a great group of panelists to you, folks that are near and dear to my heart. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Thank you for being with us, everyone. Today, please join the chat rooms and go into the booths and the other functions of our show when we're done here at this panel. Again, everything will be available to you for 30 days after this event. So without further ado, I'd like to, why don't you start us off, Ray, and give us your background and your bio.
Great. Well, thanks, Rich, and thanks for having me. Hope everyone out there in the ether is enjoying much better weather than we are here in the New York Metro. My name is Ray LaChance, CEO and co-founder of Zenfi Networks. Zenfi is a communications infrastructure provider of fiber optic network, distributed edge co-location and data centers, and wireless siting solutions, predominantly focused on the mobile ecosystem. We have built over the past 5 years since inception about 1,100 route miles of fiber optic network. Most of that is what we call front haul network, and we're going to get into that during this discussion. And we occupy space in about 45 edge co-location facilities throughout the New York, New Jersey region. Our network currently has somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 to 3,000 wireless locations connected to it today, and we have about 6,000 under contract. So we've done a lot in a short time to build an infrastructure with the vision of supporting the evolving technological infrastructure as we move from 4G to 5G, mostly focused outdoors. But we think the next big shoe to drop is indoor support, and today we're going to be talking about how our infrastructure, which is called the Cloud RAN infrastructure, supports the evolution of the indoor market.
Ken?
Hi, Ken Sandfield. I'm the president of SOLiD Americas, and SOLiD is a manufacturer of DAS, radio access equipment, and optical network equipment, focused mostly on in-building, but also doing more and more outdoor. And be happy to be part of the panel. Thank you.
Thanks. Blayne?
Blayne Schorr with CTS. I'm a director of emerging technology. CTS is a national premier partner providing technology as distributed antenna systems, wireless LAN, CBRS, and fiber-based LAN solutions. And just happy to be here today.
Thank you. Lisa?
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Lisa Youngers. I'm the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. We are the only association across the Americas dedicated to the rollout of all fiber networks. We have more than 250 members in all aspects of the fiberverse, if you will. We have network operators, manufacturers, vendors, consultants, construction firms, engineering firms, and everybody involved in rolling out fiber networks to consumers and businesses everywhere.
Great, thank you. So Ray, I'm going to start with you, and I'm just looking at my notes for this panel, and who do you think the Jets are going to pick tonight in the draft?
You couldn't have asked the worst person in the world a sports question.
I'm kidding, but thank you. You really helped, and your team, Walter from your team, really helped in putting this together. So to date, the in-building wireless deployments have been focused on mostly the bigger venues, the stadiums and malls and office buildings that were 4 million square feet. What are the new technologies, and how do you see the evolving technologies like C-RAN and the sort of the off-site hoteling of the radio systems changing the ecosystem of what's going on for in-building today?
Sure. So that's a great question. You know, when we look at how the in-building environment has evolved, it's like you said, large venues, stadiums, malls, very large office complexes. It made sense for the carriers to get in and contribute and deploy their network extensions into those sites, including installing base stations and creating the baseband processing within the venue itself. The challenge is when you get to smaller venues that aren't as attractive to the carriers, we need to find other ways to gain economies of scale that make these builds make sense. And one of the evolutions, and we see this happening in outdoor, obviously, the old macro model of putting base stations on rooftops or at tower sites and then having antennas covering large areas doesn't make sense, certainly as we start to densify the network to create capacity. Well, the model we created there, and this started many years ago with outdoor DAS, you'd have a central location and you had a fiber optic cable with the base station and a fiber optic cable reaching out and hitting DAS remotes, ultimately small cells, pico cells, and now radio heads on pole top locations or street furniture locations. That model made a lot of sense because you put the baseband processing in a central location, you had your high cost equipment centralized, so you get economies of scales on OpEx and your CapEx spending. Well, how do we support the next level of in-building wireless? And we see an evolution where that same model that worked outdoors is going to work really well indoors, where we can centralize the costly base stations or the baseband processing, centralize the connectivity for backhaul back to command and control, and then reach out to building locations just like we reach out to pole tops and provide what's called front haul fiber. So the CRAN infrastructure has a backhaul between command and control and an edge data center. That edge data center is where baseband processing happens, and you reach out and touch the wireless location. Now imagine a real estate portfolio owner with 10 100,000 square foot buildings. If you aggregate those 10 100,000 square foot buildings, you'll end up with critical mass, and you accomplish the goal of the mobile operator of having enough users to justify. So I see that this ecosystem that we've created for outdoor is really going to work well as we address the next level of buildings, where we can aggregate a lot of users and use the expensive command and control, the expensive aggregation of baseband processing, and reach out with lower cost implementations within the buildings themselves that come back on a fiber front haul connection back to these edge data centers, these edge colos.
So let's establish, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but before you go on, let's establish some definitions for the low IQ guy like me on this call. The baseband processing is what I would call the radio. Is that a good definition for that?
Well, that's the base station, right? The radio is actually at the air interface, right? You have the antenna and the radio that's going to take the signal, the analog signal, digitize it, and send it back for processing back to the baseband, the compute, the RF compute portion. So that's happening, and the way it would happen in a traditional venue that had in-building wireless, that stuff would all be located at the building. So if you had 10 buildings next to each other, all 10 of those buildings would have the baseband processing with them. You replicate that same infrastructure 10 times. What I'm suggesting is we take this outdoor mobile approach and we centralize that. We use low cost, low CapEx, low OpEx fiber connectivity back. So you do everything you do to wire up a building. You put the radios throughout the building to propagate the signal, but you aggregate it within the building, and then you send it back for baseband processing, the expensive part of the solution, back at these edge data centers. And the parameters we use outdoors, we try to stay within 10 kilometers to keep latency low between baseband processing and those air interfaces, those radios and air interfaces.
Gotcha. So, Ken, it sounds like what Ray is saying is that the opportunity to share a good portion of the expense and have it in one centralized location is really going to help commercial real estate folks to be able to do this on a much more economical basis. Is the traditional DAS dead now? And what does that mean for an equipment manufacturer like you? How does that fit in with your world?
Well, no. So the distribution of RF in the building is still, DAS is still the king of distributing multiple signals. Doesn't matter what those are, right? So ultimately, what this does is it provides a much more scalable, holistic approach, right? CRAN is only one part of it, right? It's basically, I like to use the colo word, right? Co-locating all of the edge compute and all the other functions at that colo location. What that really does is provides a holistic city approach to deployment. Right now, if a multiple building owner wants to put a solution, DAS and equipment in every building, they've got to repeat that process every time, right? So they're still going to have to put infrastructure in their building. This stuff doesn't just fly through the air. I mean, you have to put cables and antennas, and you have to get those signals out in the building. But what the C-RAN and the colo approach does is that it enables you to repeat that process, knowing that you're going to have that connectivity at the colo or the C-RAN location. It provides you, with that growth path to be able to, when you add another building to that network, you already know where it's going to be going back to. It already provides everyone with access. So if you're going to invest, if a building owner is going to invest in infrastructure in their building, that's their biggest, question is how am I going to connect everyone? And then of course we haven't even gotten into where am I going to put all this stuff, right? And so putting that stuff in the C-RAN location is obviously king. So it really doesn't change. It's going to be still very similar in general in the infrastructure, although we'll probably get into it on this discussion. The fiber approach is not just going to be to the building, it's going to be vertical and it's going to be horizontal all the way through the building. So essentially the infrastructure is going to change a little bit. And the main thing is it's still all going to happen that way. It's just a little bit more efficient in how you approach building out a city and building out thousands of buildings.
So Ray, back to you for a second. This sounds a lot like the theory of the cloud itself, that I don't have to have a server farm in my building because now everything can go to the cloud and we're all sharing the same processing power. Is this very similar to that concept?
Yeah, look, it's clearly the cloudification. Why is cloudification happening in all areas? It's because it ultimately reduces costs, increases scale, and gives you tremendous optionality, right? So better services for lower cost is what the cloud will give. The initial, but this can start even more simply. And if you take the C and you replace cloud with centralized, we could take the start of all this is centralized baseband processing. So you build that once, and with proprietary baseband processing, ultimately that's going to move to a lower cost cloudified infrastructure at the edge. So it's an edge cloud solution that can offer many services besides that baseband processing. But we're going to evolve there, and then it connects back via backhaul to command and control for the mobile operators. So that's how we see this evolving. But even today, if you just place the base stations in a central location and you access many properties with those same set of base stations, you'll get better utilization, better use of you build a room that's secure, that has it's environmentally controlled, and it has connectivity back to the mobile operators, and you reach out and touch each of the portfolio buildings. You build that costly infrastructure one time instead of building at each one of those locations. You save CapEx and OpEx.
Gotcha. So, Blayne, so from your standpoint as an integrator, CTS is primarily, my understanding is an integrator taking, the equipment and the designs and putting all this together. From your standpoint, does this matter? Does this new design matter, or is it all sort of, technology neutral for you? That was for you, Blayne. I can't hear you. Blayne, I think you may be muted. Anand, can you check Blayne's microphone, please? Can everyone else still hear me?
Yes, we can. He's unmuted. I think he has a connection problem.
Okay. Blayne, can you just drop and dial back in?
Rich, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
There you go. Good. So I don't know if you heard my question, but what we're talking about with centralized RAN or cloud RAN, any of this matter to you as an integrator, or does it it's all neutral and you'll create the best outcome for those folks that you're dealing with? Yeah, Blayne, can you just drop and dial back in? All the rest of you can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so let's go to Lisa. Lisa, let's Blayne will, Hanan, if you could just get to him to drop and dial back in, that would be helpful. And so, Lisa, all of this revolves around having sufficient fiber, and that's an important concept in this. That the fiber is really the most important component when you look at it, and how we make sure that we've got front haul and back haul for Ray to be able to do all these things. Tell us about what you're looking at. What you run an association, so you're in a little bit different position. How does this all play with you?
Great, yeah, and thanks. And we are thrilled to be here for that very reason. We're talking about all, what's happening, what's changing. We just heard a couple people mention, even structures that are new require still lots of fiber, which is great news for my members. If you just look at, we measure annually the deployment of fiber, period, and at the end of the year. And so in December of 2019, we noted that we had 27.3 million homes now connected to fiber across all of North America. And in 2019, we saw 450,000 route fiber miles deployed throughout the US. So we know fiber is definitely on the rise. And when we look at that, to your point, Rich, we see that in all of the iterations, whether it's fiber to the home, fiber to outdoor small cells, fiber to other backbone or macro towers, fiber to businesses, which we're all talking about. And we're especially seeing a rise in that fiber to small cells. We're talking about the deployment of 5G and in some cases still 4G. And we know we need lots of fiber there. So from my members' perspective, this is just all great news. And CRAN itself, and even a CRAN configuration needs lots of fiber. So from the association's perspective, we're excited about that. Obviously, we want to be there. We want to keep rolling out the fiber and all the different applications that we're talking about. And our association, Rich, we do a lot of education. We do a lot of advocacy on the Hill, and we produce a lot of research which supports sort of, where is fiber, where is it being deployed, and what are the benefits of fiber. We show positive correlation of all this fiber rollout to lowering unemployment, to increase GDP, and we even show reduced numbers in the cost of deploying fiber even to rural areas because of the better advancements in technology and deployment techniques and construction, et cetera. So we're excited about hearing from all of these other panelists about what they're up to and the great things they're doing. And we're excited about the role that fiber plays, and we really do see that.
Gotcha. So Ray, I get what you're saying about decentralized RAN. Makes a lot of sense to me. Are there other products and services that you can now deal with landlords and help them in their buildings? Because this is now giving you a very powerful engine to help them. What else is there that you can work with them?
Well, there's some obvious byproducts, right? If we're connecting the buildings back, imagine a portfolio owner, and I'll use our market in New York that has, again, 10 buildings with an aggregate millions of square feet of space. There's a fiber connection that goes out to that building. That fiber connection is obviously general purpose fiber link, and it could be used to leverage many things. If you imagine the applications, if you connect all 10 of your buildings back to a central location, that could be a host for your internet access, right? You can connect to the internet there and distribute to all 10 of your buildings. You can interconnect all your buildings through this centralized location, right? So you make a single connection back to the edge co-location or edge data center, and from there you interconnect your buildings together. You could also host data processing. Your cloud connectivity could be hosted from there, as well as proprietary compute that you want to put there to support your property. So if you had building management systems, you can easily host your building management compute at these edge colos. And again, that same fiber optic pathway that carries that mobile traffic can be used to carry the other traffic. And it's easy for us to set up classes of services and quality of services, SLAs on those connections. So there's a great byproduct. It's not just for the in-building wireless.
Gotcha. So Blayne, are you back with us now? We can hear you?
I'm back. Sorry
Gotcha.
about that.
Thank you. So my original question to you was, does any of this from a DAS system, the cloud RAN or centralized RAN, does any of that make a difference to you in sort of a features and benefits analysis for these clients when you're dealing with commercial real estate folks?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So yeah, it does, because I think it's a lot more efficient. And one of the things that we hear from customers is the overwhelming process, which includes the initial head-in cost and that signal source cost, and just not wanting to deal with it. And I think that's going to be a big advantage. But for us, we're looking at that in building from a holistic perspective. Distributed antenna systems, yes, we're going to put wire and antennas up. That could be a neutral host environment. That could be small cell. It could be fiber rich or fiber to the edge, as Ken was talking about, which we think gives customers a lot of flexibility and a lot of options. But we're looking at it broader than that. We're looking at how can we converge distributed antenna, cellular, how can we converge Wi-Fi with Wi-Fi 6 becoming more prevalent, with CBRS becoming more prevalent. I heard yesterday on one of the panels, you walk in and the lobby is going to be CBRS. And so with all of those, with building systems, with IoT, I mean, people are hearing IoT and they're thinking, what am I doing with all of that? Well, that's bandwidth. They're saying that there's going to be 3.6 billion IoT devices in 2021. I heard the other day that they're actually going to put sensors on the toilet paper dispensers in the high rises, and because they're going to sense when they're running out of toilet. The job's never complete until the paperwork's done. So I guess maybe you have to be old to know that little joke. But
No, I like that one. That's a good one.
But it's really relevant. It's everything that's going to come together is going to put pressure on bandwidth. It's going to put pressure on designing your infrastructure. It's going to put pressure on not only today, but can I develop something? Can I develop a plan, which we work with customers to do? Can I develop a plan that gets me 10 years down the road? What's going to happen that's going to affect my infrastructure and my connectivity? And now you're hearing my cybersecurity concerns. So that's really what we do as an integrator.
So here's a good one, Ken. This is, I think, dovetails nicely, is sort of from the standpoint of the equipment, and now this distributed RAN, or the cloud RAN, centralized RAN. How does that fit in with everyone's plan for 5G, for CBRS? How does that fit into your equipment plans, and how does that fit into what you're talking with landlords about in this ecosystem?
Well, not only does it fit in, it's kind of required, right? 5G is all about all kinds of performance benefits, a laundry list that's too long to even go through, but a long list of benefits that are 5G, right? And then 5G, of course, can eventually be private too, private 5G. It doesn't have, but ultimately the plans are really simple, right? So everyone wants to have the additional capabilities. The carriers want to provide that to the buildings. They can't do so with the traditional models because they need to push for edge compute. They also need to lower their costs, which we already talked about, Ray talked about in the beginning. If they're going to connect 5G to these buildings, they're going to need to lower their costs. They're going to do so with these types of new architectures. Today, you probably saw in the news, Dish Network decided to go with Mavenir on their cloud platforms for 5G. That is that means you're going to be running on x86 platforms, basically server farms. Well, guess what? Those servers are going to be located in place like these CRAN and colo locations. And that's going to bring the cost down and improve the performance. The next step is getting it to the building, edge of the building, and then into the building. And like I said, pushing that fiber all the way out to the edge. When we talk 5G, obviously you start getting into granularities and which bands, right? For the most part, I think everyone would agree that sub 6 gigahertz is really where it's going to be at for in-building. I don't think anyone is talking about millimeter wave right now for in-building, except for maybe large public venue type applications where you're basically almost like outdoor anyways, right? But you're going to need to do that. CBRS is just another huge opportunity to basically serve private networks and serve the enterprise. And once again, all of these things dovetail together to be able to provide that solution, provide that edge connectivity, and provide that edge processing that we need. Whether it's located at that location or whether you end up putting it someplace else, you're still going to need that connectivity for all your facilities. And
Right.
don't
So,
forget,
I'm sorry.
go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I had a great question that came in that I want to run by Ray. And I think this is terrific. And I actually don't know the answer to this. And so this is great for me to hand you the ball. Will the carriers go along and support the RF signal through an SLA? The fiber is not theirs, and there becomes a lot of potential for finger pointing. That's the great question here, Ray, at the center of this. Will the carriers go along, and how will they play nice in the sandbox?
Yeah. So look, the carriers have a dilemma. They definitely want coverage and capacity any and everywhere,
And they don't want
right?
to pay for it.
And they don't and they don't have enough capital to actually build out what they need to do. So they've adopted for many years shared infrastructure models. And if you just look back to the tower space, why did the mobile operators sell all their towers to companies like American Tower and Crown Castle, SBA, and Vertical Bridge? They divested themselves because single purpose builds don't make sense. When you look at the fiber world, I've been building outdoor wireless networks, fiber-based, since 2008. And the model has been adopted by all the mobile operators. They connect their outdoor DAS nodes, their radio heads, their small cells on somebody else's fiber network because it doesn't make sense for them to build purpose-built fiber networks to carry this RF traffic. Even Verizon and AT&T that have networks in our region have opted to they do build some of their own through their wireline businesses and lease it back to the mobile portion of the business. But in general, it's a shared infrastructure model. They're used to doing it. They've been doing it for many years now, and we expect that trend to continue because their capital budgets are they're huge, but spending that capital on fiber infrastructure is not the right place for them to spend for single purpose applications. So it's well adopted, well established, been doing it for many, many years.
I think the questioner was asking, and I think you're absolutely right about what you're saying. I think the questioner was asking more, okay, you're going to have all of the baseband in one place, and then they're going to have radios in the buildings with the antennas. But are the carriers going to cooperate with this program, given that even though you're doing a great job with this, they have to give up some control to let you do it? And we've seen the carriers are taking an enormous amount of time to get the approvals through their RF departments. They're dragging their feet on the equipment itself. This is a perfect solution. The only problem is, will they play ball with you and play nicely? Because you're going to probably do multiple carriers together. How's that piece of it going and dealing with them, with the carriers directly on the radio piece?
Well, again, they're used to this. They're used to this neutral host model where somebody else owns the radios within the building, the remotes, the DAS remotes. They're used to that. What they haven't given up yet is when they're propagating on proprietary spectrum, they want their small cells deployed, their own radio heads, and it connects back to their systems. So the deployments we do are, we like to say space power connectivity, and they bring their own devices, their radios and their base stations, and we put those at the end of our fiber links. Now they could be a dedicated fiber link for analog traffic, which most of the nodes we've built in New York and over the years, or analog remotes, DAS remotes. They moved to digital, and we carry that over dedicated fiber wavelengths, and eventually it's going to move to a packet infrastructure. And it's going to be a packet infrastructure with quality, with class of services, with quality of service SLAs. And again, this is the evolution of this market. And my argument is it's not going to get done in the smaller venues without using a shared infrastructure because the carriers do not have the capital budgets to support doing this themselves. So they buy into your SLAs, they buy into the shared infrastructure business, and it's the way it works now, and it's the way it's going to work. It's the only way it's going to work in the future.
Yeah. So Blayne, you're a guy who's in the middle of all that crossfire with the carriers, with the building owners. From your standpoint, how is it working, and are they cooperating? Even if you think about the way it worked in a neutral host situation, man, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of brain damage, a lot of blood and guts in that whole process. Does this make it easier? Does it make it harder, or is it neutral from that standpoint?
Well, I think the reality is one, the carriers have to approve anything or any design that you're going to put into an in-building, whether that's and whatever that signal source is. We have small environments where it's a small cell. We have large environments where it's a BTS. But I think the key is for us is we do a ton of design for the carriers out of our design center in Phoenix, where we have that relationship with them that I tell people, I said, when we call them, they pick up the phone. And so we can have that relationship. It's easier to get feedback and input on designs that we do, and then to get the approval, because approval's everything. If the carrier doesn't approve that in-building infrastructure, it really doesn't matter. If you have a CRAN or what that head-end's going to be, that in-building, they have to be intricately involved from the very beginning. And that's where we as an integrator and our experience with them as a premier partner, we get them involved early, which then expedites the process.
Gotcha. So we have a question coming in. This is a good one because I think, Ray, I'd love to know the answer to this myself. How is PON and GPON being used for smart building convergence? And does that have any impact on what you're doing here at all?
Yeah. So clearly the PON technologies will be useful. I'm not going to get into the in-building piece because that's certainly not my forte, but it makes sense for distribution and fiber, conserving fiber utilization. On the outdoor, I envision PON technologies being used. Right now, the carriers are asking for the world, right? They'll ask for multiple fibers to every small cell site, and they don't want to multiplex it in any way. They don't want to wave division it. They don't want to TDM it, GPON it, or PON it. They want dedicated fibers. That's not going to last because we're running out of capacity. No matter how much fiber we build, the capacity is getting eaten up, and there's absolutely a fiber exhaust problem that will happen in the future. We have to move not only to PON technologies, but other multiplexing technologies, which could be, could be Metro Ethernet and VLAN. It could be IP layer. I think the transport network that connects all these devices together is going to evolve to ultimately a routed infrastructure.
Wow. So Lisa, Ray, one of the premier fiber operators in the country, says they're running out of fiber. What are you doing about this?
Well, that's news to me. I've got a lot of people to introduce Ray to, I think. So we have and we'd love to have Ray on board, but that's another matter for another time. So we just talked to a lot of our construction members in the last week, and obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Here we are online, a new format while we're all living in a pandemic. And we, of course, have seen just an ongoing, consistent demand for fiber. From our perspective, for all the online learning applications, we are seeing the fiber networks holding up better, better able to meet those demands. Definitely in the telework and work from home scenarios, where suddenly symmetrical networks are what everyone needs in order to do things like this, video conferencing platforms, et cetera. So shines a big bright light again, symmetrical networks on fiber networks. And we met with all of our construction members last week, and they are all still deploying. In fact, at least one of our construction firms had to hire even more crews. The demand for fiber remains. I guess that would be consistent with what Ray said. And they're, the pressures to keep building and keep maintaining and building those networks is there. I mean, they're grateful that the demand is there. Because of the pandemic, they've had to implement all sorts of new practices and protocols and safety measures, which they're all implementing and observing. But we certainly see the demand continue. We aren't aware of any supply issues right now, but we are happy as an industry that the demand is up. And I will say our construction members actually predict that that will continue post-pandemic, and in fact, they see an explosion there. So a lot of ongoing work in the fiber area, and I think what we're going through right now has just highlighted the need for those networks over other networks. And so that's what our construction members are seeing. You didn't ask this, Rich. I would say the only challenge that the construction members see to deploying fiber networks is actually the workforce and labor skill shortage. And they address that. They are all working with community colleges, tech schools. They're very innovative. We try to support that, as do others, partner associations of ours, friends of ours. And we're trying to find ways to bolster that workforce and labor shortage. We saw recently the Department of Labor put out some new apprenticeship and other programs to support those efforts. So we absolutely need to see money going into those workforce areas. Sometimes I see policymakers wrongly refer to that as a workforce shortage relative to 5G. My construction members, when they are building 5G networks, they say it's really a fiber network with an antenna at the end. So it's not just 5G labor and skilled workforce shortage, it's fiber network deployment. And sometimes we see the references to we need more pole climbers. It's so much more than that. The
Gotcha.
skilled labor that's missing is everything: heavy machinery, bucket trucks, reading a blueprint, designing networks, RF engineer, et cetera, and so forth. So a lot of
Gotcha.
labor is missing.
So Blayne, could you springboard on what Ray was saying and talk to us? What is PON and GPON, by the way? We didn't really get a definition. And what are you seeing in those terms?
So GPON is Gigabit Passive Optical Network, and it's basically fiber to the edge. It's taking fiber from a head end, it's going out, bypassing the normal IDFs where you have all the switches, and going all the way to an edge device at that edge. So we talked about where Ken brought up the riser, out the horizontal to the edge, which dovetails with a fiber-rich DAS scenario as well. But we're really seeing the evolution in that area from not only a point to multi-point. I can do point-to-point active Ethernet. And with the evolution of IP technology, where even now security systems are IP, which all those systems now can be run over one common infrastructure. So we're using fiber more throughout the facility. We're using GPON or active Ethernet to facilitate that network. But you're converging now building management systems. We talked earlier about Wi-Fi, about CBRS, small cell. All those things can be run across what you call a GPON fiber to the edge network. So it's becoming very robust. It's a way to get big bandwidth to the edge. And so that's why you're seeing a lot more. We're doing bids every week on fiber to the edge or GPON environment. So it's obviously it's becoming very popular.
Yeah. So what is the benefit of that for an enterprise client, a building owner, a landlord? Is there anything that they need to care about when it comes to PON and GPON?
Well, now it's becoming, I think, more mainstream. And so with one of the manufacturers that we use, it's not as much proprietary equipment, which was a concern earlier in the environment a few years ago with GPON. But we've actually got a case study of one of our OEMs that we work with that actually, when they built the building, they went from traditional to fiber to the edge or using GPON environment and saved 29% on the initial CapEx or construction costs. And that included the equipment, that included the labor. And so there are real tangible savings that the enterprise with their prop tech dollars and technology that they can actually save. But then on the OpEx, if I'm managing everything from a head end and I don't have to run out to closets to active components, it saves me time. It saves me time from an OpEx. And then finally, not to belabor, but another reason is cybersecurity. If I'm removing active components out of the environment, it's removing the human touch factor, which is the biggest part of cybersecurity. It's ability to get to and plug into your active network. And so when I'm reducing that out of the environment, it greatly enhances cybersecurity as well. So those are just two of the things that we're seeing.
Gotcha. So Ken, from an equipment standpoint, talk me through what you're doing in terms of you've got multiple carriers potentially working in these systems. What Ray is describing to us is somewhat innovative. It's not, science fiction, but talk us through the equipment piece of it and how you are handling this changeover from, sort of the old generation to what Ray is talking about with CRAN and the equipment piece of all that.
Sure. Well, I'll break that answer in two parts. One is connectivity to the actual building, to the system, and one is actually the actual infrastructure in the building. So what we're doing on the infrastructure in the building is, one, we're going straight fiber to the antenna. That's the only way to future-proof. It's the only way to get the potential future bandwidth that you need, 5G, 6G, whatever they come up with. You're going to need that. That's a given, right? And what we're doing there is we're coming out with more economical solutions that are aesthetically smaller, more pleasing, lighter weight, so they're easier to deploy with and so getting that infrastructure to be easier for the building owner to deploy is key, right? So companies like CTS are doing that already right now, where it's lowering the cost for the building owner to get that equipment in the building. And essentially, going fiber to the edge allow us to support any frequency bands or anything that's needed in the future, as well as other types of services. That's the first thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is like I just mentioned, some of the virtual technology that's happening, essentially the Open RAN standards. We're building new types of signal front ends to these systems that allow for the operators, as well as for companies like CTS, to deploy CBRS, also in a server-based fashion, right? So you're deploying software in a stack of servers versus buying a proprietary bunch of equipment. From then, the building owner can put it in the building, they can put it in their colo location, in another part of the campus that's connected by fiber, wherever it's best suited for them. And that equipment's going to be key. In the beginning, all the operators are not going to support that technology. It's going to take some time for that technology to proliferate. I mentioned Dish earlier. They're going that route already. They'll be one of the first ones, powered by Mavenir. And so what that does is it allows them, so we're developing all of the radio and the front end technology to drive these systems. So that's what we're focused on. And the goal there is focusing on Open RAN or ORAN standards, ORAN Alliance standards, in order to drive those technologies, drive the cost down, make it essentially open standard. That's going to allow everyone to locate their servers where they want to, in these colo locations, or or in the cloud, well, that is the cloud essentially, and drive those costs down and increase the capability to deploy these systems. So we're focused on those two key pieces.
Got it. So Ray, as I said before, this isn't science fiction. This isn't, something that's going to happen. But can you talk us through what the implementation has been like so far? You've got this up and running in a number of places, or is this still sort of, a newish technology? And what's the response been? And I kind of alluded to this before. What's the response been in terms of the cooperation from the carriers with this and getting this done? Can you talk us through the real world piece of this?
So as I said earlier, this technology has been around for a long time. We've been doing it in the outdoor for literally thousands and thousands of nodes now that are connected to our network, and nearly 10,000 on the outdoor nodes connected to third-party fiber for Sprint, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon today. Right, that is real world. This model for connectivity for in-building has been well adopted in campus environments and metros with the centralization of base stations, right? So this CRAN, again, centralized RAN environment is well adopted. The carriers they do it this way. This is just, it's been adopted and it's happening this way. The stuff, what's happening in the in-building though, as it's moving to newer newer technologies, where it's a shared spectrum technology like CBRS or even Wi-Fi, is where I think the real interesting developments are happening to support existing infrastructures. Certainly DAS has been deployed for a long time in buildings, and running that DAS, connecting it and aggregating it, and then sending it out of the building back to base stations this is just, that's not new stuff. The new stuff is what's happening on the command and control side. The 5G cloudification of the base stations, really interesting. The stuff that Ken's doing over at SOLiD for distribution within the buildings, smarter infrastructures, fiber infrastructures, is all leading to lower OpEx and CapEx costs, which is what absolutely is required for us to serve the smaller the portfolios of smaller buildings, because the demand may be there in aggregate, but it's not there individually. So justifying all that CapEx and OpEx is very difficult on the smaller properties. This is a solution to create economies of scale, and we need economies of scale to make this work. So there's no real magic in what's happening, and all the deployments we've done to date have been these traditional centralized base station deployments. It's going to evolve towards a cloudification where there's going to be x86 processing happening on Linux servers at these base stations that become part of the carrier cloud, the mobile operator cloud, and that's what's evolving.
But I guess the question, and I understand where you're coming from. I guess I'm trying to dig down another layer. So, a building owner with 5 buildings in Midtown or within 10 kilometers comes to you and says, "I like your style, Ray. I want to do this with you." And you go, "Okay, the best way to do this, guys, is if we get all 3 carriers to sign on to this, because it works great with one, and we're doing a a centralized RAN, but it works even better if we get all the carriers." Am I on solid ground there yet?
Well, okay. So there's 2 parts of this. First of all, the smaller portfolios, it's harder to to get the carriers' involvement from a capital perspective.
Right.
It's tough enough, and certainly Blayne can describe this more deeply than I can, but it's harder to get the carriers to even provide signal source for smaller properties because it costs them money. If you're a portfolio owner and you can aggregate millions of feet of space and thousands of users and deliver them to one place where the carrier has to provide signal and base station, you have a better shot. So I think this network sharing is happening to reduce costs. So I think the only way you're going to get the carriers to participate is to find other ways to pay for these infrastructures within the buildings and the connectivity to these colos, and deliver to the carriers a package of a lot of users and a lot of square feet. So I think I've been down this path with many neutral hosts in our region that just can't get carrier support to build the venues they're trying to build. Right. So this is the solution, is to aggregate users. And the way to aggregate users is the way we've described: centralize this edge colo and baseband processing, get all the users there and treat it like one collection or one portfolio that's got critical mass.
So Blayne, let's talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I don't think I coined this phrase, but we've used the term orphan DAS an awful lot. So I'd like to make the next part of this question to you. So how difficult is it in this day and age to get the carriers to get radios for a potential landlord? And then second part of it is, if they now believe fervently in what Ray's talking about and they want this, what's the difficulty level? The like gymnastics. The difficulty level in this this triple flip of getting the 3 carriers now to agree to do this and work in a centralized RAN environment. How do you see that working?
So with the, none of this is an easy process. You know, when you're working with the carriers or operators, it almost depends on the region. It can depend on the time of year based on their budgets, depending on if you're close to an upcoming Super Bowl. I mean, it's really true. I mean, we just got to note that if you are close in the next couple of years, if you're a hotel close to an upcoming Super Bowl, start asking for a DAS, and because it's part of that funding. So so the process, like I said earlier, is you get to them early, you start talking about the property, and sometimes it depends on if it's a property that has a national footprint with a given carrier. Then they obviously will be more willing to fund or get involved with, you know, at least the backhaul or the head end, which is made a lot easier with Ray's scenario that he's talking about with CRAN. But it really is a site-by-site process with the carriers. I wish there was a blanket answer, but there really isn't, because it's really, like I said, not to belabor, it's based on region, based on time of the year, based on their budget. And so that's part of it. But the other thing with the three carriers is that, you know, it might seem, you know, kind of simple, but it's almost, if you can get Verizon or AT&T first, then you might then suck in the other ones. And then now you have one, you know, once that's all completed. And so I think the CRAN is going to really help. I think if they're going to look at that as very efficient, they're going to look at that as, when you're talking about, you know, the aggregation of radios and the stadium and then the buildings and the time usage and trying to pull that together. I think that Ray's really got a great, you know, a deal there. And I think they're going to be very attracted to that. But I think it's the key is what I've always done is you get the big carriers first, and then you suck the other ones in. And that's part of a process that you have to go through.
Right. So, you know, just to summarize, no easy feat in getting that all done when you have, you know, multiple interests, and maybe you get a good guy who's a very strong influence at one carrier and the others are lazy or they're too busy, you know, so you've got multiple situations. So Ken,
Right.
I wanted to ask a quick question. If you can give us a quick answer, I'd appreciate it, because we're down to just a few minutes. Public safety. You know, Ray's made me a convert now. I get what he's talking about. I understand the technology, and they're poised to do it and do it well. Now I'm a landlord and I buy into this. What's the public safety ramification? Let's focus on New York if we can, because that's where primarily Ray's operating in Jersey. What is the public safety ramification for a centralized or cloud RAN installation?
Well, I mean, you know, currently, you know, speaking for the traditional radio systems that the New York City Fire and police use, primarily, you know, they're using they're not using base stations, you know, right, predominantly in the average in-building installations, but we're coming to the point where we can't deploy that way anymore. There's too much interference, right? Pretty soon that we're going to get to the point where we're going to be actually feeding these things from a base station, or in the case of FirstNet, it is driven off the AT&T build, right? Which could be cloudified, could be, you know, radio heads, whatnot. So ultimately, therein lies some opportunities, right, to build out more buildings that with that approach, right? No doubt about it, no doubt about it. But we're fighting a lot of traditional radio systems that are done old school way, right? And so either way, I think we have two opportunities. One is to satisfy those old school requirements of getting the radios to work. And two is to push ahead and look at the new opportunities like FirstNet and get those into all the buildings, right? There's no reason why you can't run a lot of things across FirstNet as well. So lots of opportunity there. And don't forget, safety is not just the fire and police department having coverage. You know, if I'm in a high-rise building, I want my cell phone to work so when I can call someone for help. And I think right now in the U.S. with everything that's going on, I think what we're going to find is that people are actually finding out that they need their devices don't work where they need them to everywhere, and it's going to uncover a lot of opportunity from a safety perspective more than anything.
Well, we hear it all the time. 80% of the calls in this country are initiated indoors. So it's an important factor in doing that. So Ray, I'm going to give you the last word on this, but I just do want to say a couple of things just about the event. This is our last panel of the 2-day event. It's been, from what I could tell from the chat rooms and from the text and emails I'm getting, it's been a great success so far. I want to thank all of you for doing this panel, and for everybody who did work with us on the panels, especially the exhibitors and the folks that supported us in this and gave everybody the ability to kind of join us for free as a virtual event. The other thing I'd like to say, and this talks about what Lisa was discussing, I wrote a piece about a week ago called "You Are Essential," thanking all the people that work in our business, your labor forces, all of yours, and how if this had happened to us 5 or 10 years ago and we didn't have the communications we do today, we would have been, quite plainly in English, screwed. And so I wrote this open letter to the industry because I feel so strongly that these folks have kept us going during this pandemic. And again, I thank all those people that are out there working today. I'm sure those people are thankful they have their jobs because, we are an essential industry. So Ray,
Rich, can I comment on that real quick before you
Sure.
go to Ray? Just on the essential worker. So similar, and thank you to all your panelists and all their employees who are essential. And our association, along with many others, did just sign on to a big industry-wide letter, and it definitely calls out those who are maintaining and building our critical network, like all of you, as essential workers. So I would add my thank you, and our association absolutely signed on to that and supports that as well. So thanks, Rich, for mentioning
Good.
that.
Thank you, Lisa. So Ray, you have a philosophy. You guys are working towards this. You're one of the premier fiber carriers, and you're working now on this cloud RAN, centralized RAN program. Where do you see us going as we go forward? Where is this taking us to from an in-building enterprise standpoint? Because those are the folks that are listening in today.
Well, I think, first of all, thanks, Rich, for putting this together. It's really, you're an innovator and a leader in the industry, and I think the attendance is showing that. Look, this is the only way this can happen. We cannot get dependent. If you take a city like New York that's so big, right, and has so many buildings that need connectivity, the only way to do this is with this shared infrastructure approach. So that's going to happen. The technology from companies like SOLiD is evolving to support low-cost, pervasive installation that allows for wireless connectivity any and everywhere within the building. The only way to do that is to lower the cost and make it digestible by the people that have to pay for it, and it won't be the carriers most likely. It's going to be the developers and the owners, the portfolio owners are going to end up paying for this as a utility within their building. So they have to, this technology infrastructure has to be multi-purpose and low cost. The only way to do that is to cloudify it and get economies of scale. So our network piece of this, which is a small piece of the of the ecosystem, is an important piece of lowering the overall capital and operating costs for this network. So as we create this low cost environment, there will be a lot more adoption. We'll see a lot more pervasive deployment of these systems. And again, what matters here is who's going to pay for. Our initial problem is figuring out who's going to pay for it. I think it's pretty well determined on the smaller properties, the Class B and down properties. It's going to be paid for by either the tenant or the owner of the property, and not the carriers. Carriers have to participate, and that means they have to provide baseband processing and backhaul circuits. So they're paying for that piece, but that's pretty much all they're going to pay for when it comes to the in-building with the smaller properties.
So Blayne, last word. You agree? How does the ecosystem look from your seat?
Ecosystem looks bright. I think there's a ton of opportunity in the future, and technology is growing, which is great for us. And finally, Rich, thank you very much for putting this together. Great opportunity. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. You guys are terrific. You guys all have great staffs. Blayne from CTS. I love Kate and Tom, and we work together. Ray from Victoria and Melissa and your team, and Walter and Andy, great guys. Ken, you have a terrific team. Lisa, I don't know your team as well, but thank you all for participating in this today and in the show. And again, this will all be available for the next 30 days. So your teams, your customers, anyone who wants to look back at this panel and everything we've done are more than welcome. Thank you all. Hanan,
Thanks.
we're going to be clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.